Listen carefully, because the most dangerous enemy in your life doesn't shout. It whispers. It sounds reasonable, polite, responsible. It tells you to wait, to be understanding, to not rock the boat. And every time you listen to it, you lose a little more ground. Here's the uncomfortable truth most people never face. You were not born weak. You were trained into it. From childhood, you were rewarded for obedience, punished for resistance, praised when you stayed quiet, corrected when you spoke up. And slowly, almost invisibly, you learned a rule that now runs your life. Approval equals safety. That rule became a voice in your head, a constant editor, a silent leash. Right now, as you're watching this, it's probably active. It's saying things like, "Calm down, this is extreme. Not everyone is out to get you. Power isn't for people like you." That voice is not wisdom, it is conditioning. And Machiavelli understood this long before psychology gave it a name. He observed something brutal about human behavior, something people-pleasers refuse to accept. People do not respect kindness without boundaries. They exploit it. Let me ask you something uncomfortable. How many times have you swallowed words that should have been spoken? How many times have you agreed just to avoid tension? How many times have you watched someone bolder take what you deserved, while you told yourself, "My time will come"? That moment at work when your idea was repeated louder by another man and praised. That moment with a friend who cancels last minute again because he knows you'll understand. That moment when someone crossed a line and you smiled instead of stopping them. Those moments weren't accidents. They were tests, and you failed them. Not because you're stupid or incapable, but because you were operating under the wrong rule. Machiavelli wrote for men who wanted to stop being ruled by appearances. He wasn't interested in morality as comfort. He was interested in power as reality. And the first lesson, the darkest one, starts here. The voice telling you to be agreeable is not protecting you. It is keeping you small. People-pleasers believe conflict is dangerous. But Machiavelli saw the opposite. Avoiding conflict doesn't create peace. It creates invisibility. When you avoid tension, others feel safe using you. When you avoid asserting yourself, others feel entitled to lead you. When you avoid discomfort, you train the world how to treat you. And here's the part no one tells you. The more you suppress your edge, the more aggressive it becomes, internally. That's why people-pleasers carry so much resentment, why they explode unexpectedly, why they feel nice on the outside but angry underneath. You're not calm, you're contained, and containment always leaks. Machiavelli believed that weakness disguised as virtue was the most dangerous weakness of all, because it never defends itself until it's too late. That inner voice tells you, be patient, be humble, don't be difficult. But ask yourself, difficult for who? For the man benefiting from your silence, for the system that profits from your compliance, for the people who never return the loyalty you give freely? Here's the shift that begins your transformation. You don't need to become cruel. You need to become solid. Solid men don't beg for respect. They don't explain themselves endlessly. They don't fear losing approval, because approval was never their currency. And this is where things get dangerous, because the moment you stop listening to that voice, the world reacts. People push back. They test you harder. They accuse you of changing. That's not a sign you're doing something wrong. That's the sign you're finally doing something real. And in the next lesson, Machiavelli delivers a truth that destroys the people-pleaser at the root. A truth so uncomfortable most men run from it. It explains why being liked is often a liability, why being respected changes everything, and why the moment you stop explaining yourself, your power multiplies. But only if you're ready to let go of who you've been pretending to be. Here's a truth that will sting at first. The moment you decide you want to be liked, you surrender control. Read that again. Because Machiavelli understood something modern men are never taught. Liking is a transaction, not a virtue. When you want to be liked, you start negotiating your behavior. You soften your words. You delay your decisions. You dilute your boundaries. And every dilution sends a signal. Not consciously, not verbally, but psychologically. People don't ask, is he nice? They ask, what can I get away with? This is where the people-pleaser collapses. He believes respect comes after approval. Machiavelli saw the reverse. Respect comes first. Approval, if it comes at all, comes later. Think about the men you've respected most in your life. Not admired from a distance, respected. They weren't constantly explaining themselves. They weren't apologizing for taking space. They weren't worried about being misunderstood. They were clear, and clarity is threatening. That's why people pleasers avoid it. Clarity creates friction. Friction creates exposure. Exposure reveals who's aligned with you and who was only comfortable using you. Here's the trap. The people pleaser confuses social harmony with personal safety. He thinks if everyone feels good, nothing bad will happen. But Machiavelli watched courts, kings, generals, and rivals tear each other apart, and he noticed something chilling. The most agreeable men were never protected. They were positioned, placed where they were useful, discarded when they weren't. And the men who tried to be loved by everyone, they were the first to be sacrificed. Because when conflict arrives, and it always does, people choose sides, and no one fights for a man who never stood for himself. Let me give you a simple test. The last time you said yes when you wanted to say no, what happened afterward? Did you feel stronger or smaller? Did the other man respect you more? Or did he push again later? People pleasers tell themselves stories to survive the discomfort. He didn't mean it. It's not worth the argument. I'll deal with it later. But later never comes, because every unchallenged boundary violation becomes precedent. Machiavelli warned rulers against this exact mistake. He wrote that leniency without strength invites contempt, that generosity without authority creates dependency, not loyalty, that men follow power, not kindness. And here's the darkest part. When you try to be liked, you teach others that your approval of them matters more than your approval of yourself. That flips the hierarchy. Suddenly, you're auditioning for your own life. You explain your decisions. You justify your needs. You soften your tone so no one feels threatened. And in doing so, you erase the one thing that creates gravity, indifference to approval. This is why powerful men often appear cold at first glance. Not cruel, not heartless, but unmoved. They don't rush to be understood. They don't chase reassurance. They don't adjust themselves to fit every room. They let the room adjust to them. And that makes people uncomfortable, especially people who benefited from your old version. Here's what will happen the moment you stop trying to be liked. Some men will call you arrogant. Others will say you've changed. A few will quietly step back. That's not loss, that's filtration. Machiavelli believed power begins when you stop explaining yourself to people who were never listening anyway. When you speak less, but mean more. When your no lands without apology. When your presence doesn't ask permission. But there's a cost. You will feel guilt, deep guilt, because people-pleasing isn't just a habit, it's an identity. Breaking it feels like betrayal. You'll feel like you're becoming someone worse, harder, less nice. That's the final defense mechanism of weakness. And it's why most men retreat right here. They go back to being agreeable, back to being liked, back to being invisible. But if you push past this moment, if you let go of the need to be liked, something shifts. Your words slow down, your decisions firm up. Your silence starts speaking louder than your explanations ever did. And in the next lesson, Machiavelli reveals something even more dangerous. A rule about fear, discomfort, and authority that directly contradicts everything you've been taught about being a good man. It's the lesson that decides whether people hesitate before crossing you or feel entitled to do it again. Most won't make it through that realization. But if you do, you'll never negotiate your worth again. Here's the lesson that makes most men flinch. Authority is not built on comfort. It is built on tension. And the people pleaser has been trained to eliminate tension at all costs. You smooth things over. You laugh things off. You absorb disrespect so the moment doesn't get awkward. But Machiavelli saw what happens when tension disappears. Power disappears with it. Because tension is a signal. It tells others there is a line, a boundary, a consequence. When there is no tension, there is no edge. And when there is no edge, there is nothing to respect. Think about it. Why do certain men walk into a room and conversation shifts? Why do voices lower? Why do jokes stop right before crossing a line? It's not because those men are friendly. It's because people sense potential friction. Not violence, not anger, uncertainty. people don't know exactly how far they can go, and that uncertainty creates restraint. The people pleaser does the opposite. He makes himself predictable, always accommodating, always understanding, always available. And predictability is safety for everyone except him. Machiavelli warned leaders against being too soft, not because softness was immoral, but because it was ineffective. He understood human psychology long before experiments confirmed it. Men test boundaries by nature. They probe for weakness. They push until they meet resistance. If resistance never comes, the pushing never stops. This is why the people pleaser's life slowly fills with resentment. He says yes, then resents the cost. He stays quiet, then hates the man who spoke over him. He avoids conflict, then feels rage when others take advantage. But here's the truth most don't want to hear. You taught them how to treat you. Every time you removed tension to keep things nice, you trained others that you won't push back. That doesn't make you safe. It makes you exploitable. Authority, in Machiavelli's world, came from controlled discomfort. Not chaos, not cruelty, but firmness. The ability to let a moment be awkward, the willingness to let silence stretch, the discipline to not rush in and smooth things over. People pleasers fear silence, because silence forces exposure. It reveals who has power in the moment. That's why you rush to explain yourself, why you over-justify, why you add extra words to soften the impact. But every unnecessary explanation is a concession. It tells the other man, I need you to understand me. I need your agreement. I need your comfort. Machiavelli would call that surrender. Power doesn't announce itself, it waits. Let me show you how tension actually works. Imagine a man disrespects you, subtle, deniable, socially masked. The people pleaser laughs, shrugs it off, moves on. The powerful man pauses. He doesn't explode. He doesn't insult. He simply lets the moment hang. A look, a silence, a measured response. And suddenly the room shifts, because now there's uncertainty. Did he notice? Did he accept it? Did he store it? That uncertainty does more than 1,000 angry words. Machiavelli understood that fear doesn't come from aggression. It comes from unpredictability paired with restraint. The people pleaser is predictable. His reactions are known. His limits are visible. And once limits are visible, they are tested. This is why comfort is dangerous. Comfort tells others nothing will happen if they cross you. Comfort invites escalation. And here's the brutal realization. Every time you choose comfort over clarity, you delay a confrontation, but you increase its future cost. That's why small violations become big ones. Why mild disrespect turns into open disregard. Why the explosion, when it finally comes, feels uncontrollable. You didn't suddenly become angry. You became full. Machiavelli would tell you this. Discomfort handled early prevents catastrophe later. But to do that, you must break an addiction. The addiction to being seen as easygoing. The addiction to being low maintenance. The addiction to being the man who never makes things difficult. Because difficult men aren't avoided. They're respected. And the next lesson is where this gets dangerous. Because Machiavelli reveals a truth about fear. A truth so misunderstood that entire generations were taught the opposite. It explains why being feared slightly is safer than being loved completely. Why authority requires emotional distance. And why the people pleaser's greatest mistake is trying to be harmless. If you're still here, you're already different. But the next step will force you to choose who you want to be seen as. The man who is easy to cross, or the man who makes others think twice. This is the sentence most men reject before they even understand it. Being feared a little protects you. Being loved too much exposes you. The people pleaser hears that and panics. Fear is bad. Fear makes you cruel. Fear pushes people away. That's what you were taught. Machiavelli wasn't interested in what felt good. He was interested in what worked. And what he observed again and again was brutal. Love is fragile. Fear is stable. Love depends on mood, on benefit, on convenience. Fear depends on consequence. That doesn't mean terror. It doesn't mean rage. It doesn't mean intimidation. It means restraint backed by certainty. The people pleaser believes love creates loyalty. Machiavelli watched love evaporate the moment circumstances changed. A friend stops needing you. A colleague gains leverage. A group finds a stronger leader. And suddenly, all that warmth disappears. Why? Because love without structure is emotional debt, and unpaid debt always turns into resentment. Here's the mistake people pleasers make. They try to be indispensable by being agreeable, by being available, by being endlessly flexible. But flexibility without limits doesn't create loyalty. It creates entitlement. People begin to expect your time, your patience, your forgiveness. And expectations are dangerous. Because the moment you fail to meet them, you're no longer seen as human. You're seen as defective. Machiavelli understood this paradox. The more you give without consequence, the more people punish you for stopping. That's why the people pleaser feels trapped. He's built a prison out of generosity. Now contrast that with fear, measured fear, not fear of violence, fear of loss, fear of access being revoked, fear of boundaries being enforced. This is the fear that creates respect. When people know you will act calmly, decisively, without drama, they adjust. They think before speaking. They choose words more carefully. They don't assume your compliance. That hesitation is power. Machiavelli wrote that men will always risk offending a man who is kind, but they hesitate to offend a man who is firm. Why? Because firmness signals consequence. The people pleaser hates consequence. He wants understanding instead. But understanding doesn't stop behavior. Only cost does. Let me ask you something direct. When was the last time someone genuinely feared losing access to you? Not because you threatened them, but because you walked away without explanation, because you enforced a boundary without apology, because you removed your presence instead of arguing. If your answer is never, then listen carefully. You have been too safe, and safe men are taken for granted. This is where guilt appears. Because the moment you start enforcing boundaries, people react. They say you're cold. They say you've changed. They say you're becoming someone else. What they really mean is, you're no longer predictable. And unpredictability, controlled unpredictability, is what Machiavelli saw as essential. The people pleaser tries to reassure everyone. I didn't mean it like that. I hope you don't take this the wrong way. I just want to be fair. The powerful man does none of that. He lets reactions happen. He lets discomfort exist. He doesn't rush to soothe, because soothing others is not his job. Here's the shift that changes everything. You stop trying to be loved for your softness and start being respected for your consistency. Consistency is frightening because it means you won't bend under pressure. You won't negotiate boundaries emotionally. You won't be manipulated by guilt. And once people realize that, they behave differently around you. They may not like you more, but they will cross you less. That's the trade-off, and Machiavelli would tell you it's worth it. But there's a deeper danger ahead, because once you stop seeking love, you face something far more uncomfortable: loneliness. Not isolation, not abandonment, but standing without reassurance. Most men collapse here. They go back to people-pleasing because silence feels unbearable, because being misunderstood feels threatening, because being disliked feels like death. And that's exactly why the next lesson matters more than all the others. Because Machiavelli exposes the final chain that keeps people-pleasers obedient: their addiction to validation. Break that, and nothing controls you anymore. But fair warning, once you see this clearly, you will never unsee it. There is one chain stronger than fear, stronger than guilt, stronger than habit, validation, the need to be seen as good, reasonable, fair. The people-pleaser doesn't just want peace, he wants confirmation that he deserves it. Machiavelli would call this the most elegant form of control, because when a man needs validation, you don't have to threaten him. You just withhold approval. Watch what happens to a people-pleaser when he senses disapproval. His posture shifts, his voice softens, his words multiply. He starts explaining, justifying, clarifying, not because he did something wrong, but because he feels something dangerous: the risk of being misjudged. That fear is older than logic. It comes from early survival instincts, from needing acceptance to stay protected. But Machiavelli understood something cold and precise. A man who needs to be seen as good can be guided anywhere, because goodness becomes a leash. You hesitate to say no because you don't want to look selfish. You tolerate disrespect because you don't want to look aggressive. You accept unfairness because you don't want to look difficult. And slowly, your life stops being yours. The world rewards men who appear virtuous, but only until they stop being useful. Then virtue becomes irrelevant. This is why people-pleasers feel shocked when they're discarded. I did everything right. I was loyal. I was patient. Machiavelli would answer simply, you were compliant. Compliance is not currency. It's expectation. Here's where it gets uncomfortable. Most people-pleasers don't fear conflict. They fear being wrong. Not factually wrong, morally wrong. They fear the internal sentence, maybe I'm the bad guy. So they overcorrect. They give more, explain more, tolerate more, until they are exhausted. And exhaustion makes them bitter. That bitterness leaks out sideways. Passive aggression, sarcasm, withdrawal. But none of it fixes the root problem. Because the root problem is this: you outsourced your self-judgment. You let others decide whether you were good, whether you were fair, whether you were acceptable. Machiavelli warned rulers never to let moral approval be decided by the crowd. Why? Because the crowd changes its mind. One day you're praised, the next you're criticized, and if your identity depends on that approval, you will bend endlessly. Power begins when you become your own judge, when you decide, internally, I am justified. Not because everyone agrees, but because your standards are clear. The people-pleaser has no internal court, only an external jury, and juries are cruel. They demand performance, they punish firmness, they reward sacrifice until it becomes inconvenient. Breaking free from validation addiction feels terrifying, because it means you will be misunderstood. It means people will assign motives you don't recognize. It means you will no longer rush to defend your character. Machiavelli would tell you this. A man who constantly defends his goodness invites suspicion. Powerful men let their actions stand without explanation. They don't argue with perceptions. They don't chase redemption. They don't beg to be seen correctly. They move. And movement creates authority. Here's a test you can run today. The next time someone disapproves of you, says you're selfish, cold, or unfair, do nothing. No defense, no justification, no correction. Let the discomfort sit. Watch how quickly the dynamic shifts. Because the moment you stop reacting to judgment, judgment loses leverage. But this is only possible once you accept a harsh truth. You cannot be powerful and universally approved. Trying to be both will destroy you. And in the next lesson, Machiavelli exposes why most people-pleasers sabotage themselves at the exact moment power becomes possible. It's not because they lack courage. It's because they misunderstand timing. And that misunderstanding costs them everything. Here's the pattern you've lived more times than you realize. You stay quiet. You stay patient. You tell yourself, now isn't the right time. You wait until the moment passes. And then, when the cost is highest, when the damage is done, you finally react. Anger, frustration, an emotional outburst that surprises everyone, including you. Machiavelli saw this cycle clearly. He wrote that delayed force is not mercy. It is weakness that compounds. The people-pleaser misunderstands timing because he believes restraint equals strength, but restraint without presence is submission. Power is not about how much force you use, it's about when. The people-pleaser waits for permission to act. The powerful man acts at the first clear signal. Small disrespect addressed early requires almost no energy. The same disrespect ignored becomes explosive. That's why people-pleasers are shocked when relationships collapse. It came out of nowhere. No one saw it coming. Everyone saw it coming, they just knew you wouldn't act. Machiavelli understood this in warfare and politics alike. A threat ignored becomes emboldened. A boundary delayed becomes negotiable. A warning unspoken becomes irrelevant. Here's the brutal truth. People-pleasers don't avoid confrontation. They postpone it, and postponement is far more dangerous. Because every delay communicates uncertainty. When you hesitate, the other man doesn't think he's kind. He thinks he's unsure. And uncertainty invites pressure. This is why manipulative men target people-pleasers. They sense hesitation instantly, not in your words, but in your timing. You pause before responding. You overthink your tone. You wait to see how others react. That pause is an opening. Machiavelli would tell you that power must be decisive, even when gentle. Decisiveness ends testing. Hesitation invites it. Let me make this clear. You don't need to raise your voice. You don't need to threaten. You don't need to dominate. You need to act early. Early boundaries feel awkward. Late boundaries feel aggressive. That's the paradox. People pleasers fear early action because it feels uncomfortable. But discomfort is temporary. Loss of respect is not. Think back to the last time someone crossed a line. There was a moment, brief, subtle, when you felt it. A tightening in your chest, a flash of irritation. That was the moment. You ignored it. That instinct wasn't emotion. It was information. Machiavelli trusted signals over sentiments. He believed the first sign of disorder must be corrected immediately, not harshly but clearly, because clarity prevents escalation. This is why powerful men seem calm in conflict. They never let it grow. The people pleaser lets tension build quietly until it detonates. And when it does, the narrative flips. Now you look unstable. Now you look unreasonable. That's the tragedy. By waiting too long, you lose moral high ground and strategic position at the same time. Machiavelli would say, force applied late is cruelty. Force applied early is order. Once you understand this, your behavior changes. You stop rehearsing conversations in your head. You stop waiting for perfect wording. You respond in the moment, with few words and firm tone. Not emotional, not reactive, present. But here's where most men collapse. They fear the immediate reaction. They fear discomfort now more than damage later. And that fear keeps them trapped. In the next lesson, Machiavelli reveals the final illusion people pleasers cling to, the belief that explaining themselves will save them. It won't. And once you see why, you'll stop talking so much and start being listened to. This is where most men unknowingly destroy their authority. They talk, they explain, they justify, they clarify, and every extra word erodes their position. The people pleaser believes explanation creates understanding. Machiavelli knew it creates negotiation. The moment you explain yourself, you invite debate. You hand the other man a lever. You signal uncertainty, because confident men don't over-explain. They state, they decide, they move on. Ask yourself this: when someone truly powerful speaks, do they rush to defend their reasoning, or do they let their decision stand? Power doesn't convince, it concludes. The people pleaser, however, feels an almost physical urge to be understood, not heard, not respected, understood. That urge comes from fear, fear that silence will be misinterpreted, fear that firmness will be seen as cruelty, fear that boundaries will be judged unfair. So he fills the space with words. I just want to be clear. I don't mean this in a bad way. I hope you understand where I'm coming from. Each phrase weakens the message, because now the focus shifts from the boundary to your emotions. Machiavelli would call this a fatal mistake. He warned leaders never to expose internal doubt publicly. Why? Because men don't follow certainty that explains itself. They follow certainty that stands. The more you explain, the more people search for cracks. They interrupt, they counter, they reinterpret, and suddenly your decision becomes a discussion. The people pleaser hates endings. He wants harmony, not closure. But harmony without closure is endless negotiation. Here's the uncomfortable realization. If someone respects you, they don't need an explanation. If they don't respect you, no explanation will be enough. So who are you really talking to? Not them. Your fear. You're trying to talk fear into submission. But fear doesn't listen to words. It responds to action. This is why silence is so powerful. Silence forces others to sit with uncertainty. It removes the emotional crutches you usually provide, and uncertainty makes people cautious. Machiavelli believed silence was one of the ruler's sharpest tools. Not silence from ignorance, silence from control. When you stop explaining, something strange happens. People start projecting. They assume you know more. They assume you've decided something deeper. They assume consequences exist. That assumption protects you. The people pleaser does the opposite. He removes mystery. He removes consequence. He removes weight, and then wonders why his words don't land. Here's a rule that will change how you speak forever. Say the minimum necessary, then stop. Let the silence work. If someone pushes back, don't rush to soften. Don't add context. Don't apologize for firmness. Hold the line. Because the man who can tolerate silence controls the exchange. This is where your identity begins to shift. You stop performing goodness. You stop narrating intentions. You stop chasing agreement. And that frightens people, especially those who benefited from your explanations. They'll accuse you of being distant, cold, uncooperative. What they really mean is, you're no longer giving me access to your inner world, and access is power, which brings us to the next lesson, the most dangerous one yet. Because Machiavelli reveals why emotional transparency, when uncontrolled, is a liability, why being open too early gives others leverage, and why the people-pleaser's habit of oversharing is a silent form of self-sabotage. This is where weak men retreat, and strong men are forged. This lesson is where modern advice completely fails you. You were told to be open, to be vulnerable, to share how you feel. And done incorrectly, that advice will ruin you. Machiavelli would have considered uncontrolled emotional transparency a strategic error. Not because emotions are bad, but because information is power. The people-pleaser leaks information constantly. He shares doubts, admits uncertainty, reveals internal conflict. He thinks this creates closeness. What it actually creates is leverage. Every insecurity you reveal becomes a handle. Every fear you confess becomes a pressure point. Every emotional wound you expose becomes a map. And not everyone who listens means you well. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Most men don't betray you out of malice. They betray you out of opportunity. And emotional overexposure creates opportunity. Machiavelli observed that rulers who revealed too much of their internal state lost authority quickly. Why? Because once people know what moves you, they know how to control you. The people-pleaser confuses honesty with safety. He thinks, if they know the real me, they won't hurt me. History proves the opposite. The more predictable you are emotionally, the easier you are to manipulate. This doesn't mean you become closed forever. It means you become selective. Powerful men do not hide emotion. They time it. They choose who sees what and when. The people-pleaser shares emotions to relieve tension. The powerful man contains emotion to create stability. Ask yourself this. How many times have you explained your stress, only to have it used against you later? How many times did someone say, I know this is hard for you, right before asking for more? That wasn't empathy. That was calibration. Machiavelli warned against letting others see your internal fluctuations because emotions change, and people who see your fluctuations stop trusting your consistency. They wait you out. They pressure you when you're low. They push when you're tired. The people-pleaser is always available, emotionally, mentally, psychologically, and availability without control equals exposure. This is why powerful men appear emotionally contained, not cold, contained. They don't dump their inner world into every conversation. They don't process out loud with people who haven't earned access. They don't confuse expression with connection. Connection is built through shared experience, not emotional confession. Here's the shift that terrifies people-pleasers. You stop explaining how you feel. You start stating what you will do. You replace emotional language with action language. Instead of, I feel overwhelmed right now, you say, this doesn't work for me. Instead of, I'm struggling with this, you say, I'm not available for that. No backstory, no emotional appeal, just position. This makes people uncomfortable, because now they can't negotiate your feelings. They can only deal with your decision, and decisions are harder to manipulate than emotions. Machiavelli understood that the man who controls access to his inner world controls the relationship. But there's a cost. You will feel isolated at first, because you're no longer emotionally performing. You're no longer soothing others with vulnerability. You're no longer bonding through shared weakness. And that loneliness triggers panic in the people-pleaser. It whispers, you're losing connection. You're becoming distant. You're pushing people away. But that panic is the last defense of weakness, because what you're actually doing is filtering. Only those who respect your boundaries remain. Only those who don't require emotional access to behave decently stay. And that prepares you for the next lesson. The one that separates men who momentarily gain power from men who keep it. Because Machiavelli reveals why consistency, especially when it costs you socially, is the final weapon against manipulation. Most men break here. If you don't, you won't be controlled again. This is where almost everyone fails. Not because they don't understand the lessons, but because they can't hold them. Consistency costs more than intensity. Anyone can enforce a boundary once. Anyone can say no when they're angry. Anyone can sound firm on a good day. But Machiavelli knew real power is revealed after the moment passes, when emotions cool, when pressure returns, when people test again, because they will test again. The people pleaser hopes that one strong stand will fix everything. It won't. What fixes behavior is predictable consequence. And predictable consequence only comes from consistency. Here's the trap. You finally assert yourself. You finally say no. You finally enforce a boundary. And the reaction comes fast. Confusion, pushback, guilt. You're being harsh. This isn't like you. Why are you making this a big deal? That's the moment. The moment where power is either cemented or surrendered. The people pleaser folds. He softens. He clarifies. He compromises. And in doing so, he teaches everyone a devastating lesson. His boundaries are emotional, not structural. That means they can be negotiated. Machiavelli warned that inconsistency destroys authority faster than cruelty ever could. Why? Because inconsistency creates hope. Hope that you'll bend. Hope that this time will be different. Hope that pressure works. And hope keeps manipulators trying. Consistency, on the other hand, creates resignation. People stop pushing when they realize nothing changes. Not today. Not tomorrow. Not under guilt. Not under pressure. That's when respect appears. Not admiration. Not affection. Respect. The people pleaser confuses respect with warmth, but warmth fades. Respect endures. Let me be clear. Consistency will cost you socially. Some men will drift away. Others will label you rigid. A few will quietly resent you. That's the price. Machiavelli would say it's cheaper than chaos. Because chaos is what you lived in before. Emotional whiplash, silent resentment, delayed explosions. Consistency ends chaos. It replaces emotion with structure. And structure is what power rests on. Here's the internal battle you must win. After you enforce a boundary, your mind will attack you. You went too far. You should have explained more. You're becoming someone you don't like. That voice is not conscience. It's withdrawal. You're withdrawing from validation, comfort, and approval. And withdrawal always feels like guilt. Do not negotiate with it. Because every time you give in once, you reset the clock. Machiavelli believed authority must be boring, not dramatic, not emotional, boringly consistent. That's why powerful men don't argue. They repeat. That doesn't work for me. No, I've already decided. Same words, same tone, same outcome. Over time, people stop asking. That's when something strange happens. Your presence changes. You speak less. You move slower. You don't rush to prove anything, and people feel it. But there is one final step. One final separation between the man who escapes people-pleasing and the man who becomes untouchable. Because even consistency is not enough if you're still emotionally invested in how others see you. The final lesson is the darkest of all. It's about letting go completely of reputation, of explanation, of needing to be understood. And once you do, you don't just stop being a people-pleaser. You become free. This is the final break, the one almost no one makes, because it requires the death of an identity, not the loud identity, not the visible one, the moral identity, the need to be seen as fair, the need to be understood, the need to walk away knowing everyone agrees with your reasons. Machiavelli would say this is the last illusion that keeps a man governable, because as long as you need to be understood, you are still negotiating with the world. The people-pleaser doesn't just want peace. He wants exoneration. He wants to leave every conflict morally clean, every decision justified, every reaction validated. But power doesn't work that way. Power accepts misinterpretation as collateral damage. The moment you stop explaining, people fill the silence with their own stories. Some will assume you're cold. Some will assume you're arrogant. Some will assume you've changed for the worse. Let them. Machiavelli understood something ruthless but freeing. Reputation is not controlled. Only behavior is. The people-pleaser wastes energy managing perception. He edits himself constantly, anticipates reactions, prepares defenses in advance. The powerful man does none of that. He acts and lets consequences sort themselves out. This is why true authority feels lonely at first, because you are no longer emotionally attached to approval. You are no longer chasing agreement. You are no longer correcting misunderstandings. You let people believe whatever they need to believe, and that silence terrifies them, because silence means access is gone. The final transformation happens quietly. You stop announcing boundaries. You stop warning people. You stop giving second chances disguised as patience. You simply remove yourself. Access is revoked. Opportunities are closed. Energy is withdrawn. No speeches, no drama, just absence. And absence is the most powerful response of all. The people pleaser used to fear abandonment. Now he understands leverage. Machiavelli would say this is where a man becomes sovereign. Not loud, not feared publicly, but internally unmovable. You no longer react. You no longer explain. You no longer bend. Not because you're cruel, but because you're complete. And here's the final truth. Once you stop needing to be understood, you start being taken seriously. Once you stop chasing approval, you stop being controlled. Once you stop performing goodness, your presence becomes enough. This is what destroys the people pleaser forever. Not anger, not confidence, not dominance. Detachment. Calm, firm, unavailable to manipulation. Machiavelli never taught men how to be liked. He taught them how to remain standing when the world applies pressure. And if you've made it this far, you already feel it. The shift, the silence, the weight. You won't walk into rooms the same way anymore. You won't speak the same way. You won't tolerate the same things, not because you learned tricks, but because you let go of the one thing that made you weak, the need to be approved.